You could be fined thousands of dollars for growing one of the most nutritious plants on Earth in your backyard. The ancient Egyptians valued it so highly they buried it with their pharaohs for the afterlife. It grows without fertilizers, thrives without pesticides, and produces more nutrition per acre than almost anything in your local grocery store. So why did modern agriculture declare war on it? Keep watching and find out. This is chufa. You might know it as tiger nuts. Though it's not a nut at all, it's a tuber, a small underground bulb that's been feeding humans for at least 4,000 years. The ancient Egyptians didn't just eat it, they worshipped it. Archaeologists found chufa in sealed tombs, tucked next to golden treasures and sacred texts. Because apparently, you can't navigate the afterlife on an empty stomach. That's how important this plant was. Food so valuable you'd want it in eternity. But here's where things get weird. That same plant, the one ancient civilizations built their food security around, is now classified as a noxious weed in multiple countries. In parts of the United States, Australia, and across Europe, farmers spend millions trying to eradicate it. Agricultural extension offices publish guides on how to kill it. Chemical companies develop specialized herbicides just to wipe it out. You can literally face legal consequences for intentionally cultivating what was once considered one of humanity's most reliable food sources. How did we get here? How did a superfood become public enemy number one? The answer isn't about botany or nutrition. It's about control, profit, and an agricultural system that can't make money from a plant that refuses to play by corporate rules. But let's start where this story really begins. In the desert, thousands of years ago, ancient Egypt wasn't exactly prime real estate for agriculture. Sure, the Nile flooded annually, but that fertility was confined to a narrow strip of land. Beyond that, sand, heat, conditions that would make most crops throw in the towel before harvest. The Egyptians needed plants that could handle punishment, plants that didn't need constant babying or perfect conditions. Enter chufa. This little tuber is practically indestructible. It thrives in poor soil, laughs at drought, doesn't need fertilizers because it fixes its own nitrogen, doesn't attract many pests, so forget about pesticides. And it'll keep producing year after year because it propagates itself through those underground tubers. It's the cockroach of the food world, and I mean that as the highest compliment. When everything else dies, chufa survives. The Egyptians figured this out early. Archaeological evidence shows chufa cultivation dating back to at least 2000 BCE, possibly earlier. Researchers found massive quantities of chufa in tombs. That's not a garnish. That's a staple food. Why? You get a decent protein hit, around 4 to 8 grams per 100 grams depending on variety, and it's packed with minerals. Potassium, magnesium, phosphorus, iron, zinc, plus vitamins E and C. In modern nutritionist terms, chufa is a complete package. In ancient Egyptian terms, it was survival. You could live on this stuff. Not just survive, but actually thrive. The fiber keeps your gut healthy. The fats provide sustained energy. The minerals keep your body functioning. It's nature's MRE, military meal ready to eat, except it actually tastes good. Slightly sweet, nutty flavor, crunchy texture when dried, or you could soak them and blend them into a milk that's been drunk in Spain as horchata de chufa for centuries. The Egyptians weren't stupid. They knew they'd hit agricultural gold. Chufa could grow in marginal lands where wheat and barley struggled. It stored for months, even years, without spoiling. It provided reliable nutrition when harvests failed. And it required almost zero inputs. No fancy irrigation systems. No imported fertilizers. No pest control regimens. Just plant it and let it do its thing. This made chufa foundational to Egyptian food security. While the pharaohs and priests feasted on bread and beer and roasted meats, ordinary Egyptians relied heavily on chufa. It was democratic food. Anyone could grow it. Anyone could afford it. And that, right there, is probably the original sin that modern agriculture can't forgive. Fast forward a few thousand years. The agricultural revolution happened. Not the one where humans domesticated crops. The industrial one. The 20th century transformation that turned farming from a craft into a chemical-dependent, patent-protected industry. Suddenly, farming wasn't about working with nature. It was about controlling it, bending it, making it profitable for corporations, not just farmers. This new system had requirements. Crops needed to be uniform, predictable, patentable. They needed to respond well to synthetic fertilizers, so chemical companies could sell products. They needed to be vulnerable enough to pests that pesticides became essential. And most importantly, they needed to be proprietary, seeds you couldn't save and replant, varieties that farmers had to buy every single season. You can't really patent a plant that's been growing wild for millennia. You can't sell fertilizers to farmers growing a crop that doesn't need them. You can't market pesticides for a plant that pests largely ignore. And you definitely can't force farmers into annual seed purchases when the crop propagates itself underground automatically. In the logic of industrial agriculture, chufa wasn't a food source. It was a threat, a plant that could undermine the entire profit model. So the system did what systems do when they encounter threats. It reclassified the problem. Sometime in the mid-20th century, agricultural agencies started listing chufa as a weed, not a food crop, a weed. The justification? It's aggressive. It spreads. It's hard to control, all of which is true. But those exact same characteristics made it valuable for thousands of years. The difference is perspective. From a farmer's viewpoint in 2000 BCE, a plant that spreads easily and grows reliably is a blessing. From an industrial agriculture's viewpoint in 1950 CE, it's competition. And once something is classified as a weed, the full weight of agricultural science pivots toward elimination. Extension offices published eradication guides. Universities studied its vulnerabilities. Chemical companies formulated herbicides. Farmers were taught to see chufa as the enemy, not as emergency food or drought insurance or free nutrition growing in their fields. This is where the story gets properly absurd. Chufa became one of the most targeted plants for removal. Why? Because it competed with cotton and peanuts, two crops that required massive chemical inputs and generated substantial revenue for seed and chemical companies. Never mind that chufa was arguably more nutritious than peanuts and didn't leave soil depleted like cotton. It was in the way. State agricultural departments issued warnings. The USDA listed it as a noxious weed in certain contexts. Farmers who let it grow could face fines or lose agricultural subsidies. And the really twisted part, those same subsidies were designed to support crops that needed fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. The system literally paid farmers to grow resource-intensive crops while penalizing them for growing one that took care of itself. You've probably never seen chufa in your grocery store. That's not an accident. It's not because people don't want it. Spain has a thriving chufa industry centered around horchata production. Valencia alone produces thousands of tons annually. People love it. It's delicious, nutritious, and sustainable. But industrial food distribution systems don't know what to do with crops that don't fit their model. Chufa doesn't ship well fresh. It's small and labor-intensive to harvest by hand. It doesn't respond well to mechanical harvesting designed for uniform crops planted in perfect rows. It can't be turned into a dozen processed food products and branded with corporate logos. It's just food. Simple, honest, nutritious food. And apparently, that's not good enough for modern supermarkets. Here's the thing that really gets me. We're living through a moment where soil depletion is a global crisis. Industrial farming has stripped nutrients from farmland worldwide. We're dependent on synthetic fertilizers derived from fossil fuels. Pesticide use is creating dead zones in waterways and collapsing insect populations. Climate change is making weather unpredictable, and farmers are struggling to adapt. And meanwhile, we've classified one of the most resilient, low-input, nutritionally complete plants in human history as a weed that needs to be destroyed. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Agricultural scientists will write papers about finding drought-resistant crops for climate adaptation, completely ignoring a plant that's been drought-resistant for 4,000 years. Nutritionists will promote superfoods imported from the other side of the planet, while a genuine superfood gets poisoned out of local fields. Sustainability advocates will push for organic farming while a plant that's organic by nature gets eradicated. Why? Because chufa can't be controlled, can't be patented, can't be monetized in ways that feed corporate profits. It's a plant that empowers farmers and gardeners to be self-sufficient. And self-sufficiency is the opposite of what modern agricultural corporations want. They want dependency, annual seed purchases, chemical inputs, proprietary genetics. A system where farmers are customers, not independent operators. Let me give you some perspective on just how absurd this has become. In certain U.S. states, you can face legal action for cultivating chufa intentionally. But you can legally grow tobacco, a plant with zero nutritional value that kills millions annually. You can grow ornamental plants that require constant watering, fertilizing, and pest control. You can maintain a lawn, which is essentially an ecological dead zone that consumes resources and produces nothing, but grow a nutritious, sustainable food crop that ancient civilizations thrived on. That might be illegal. The same pattern plays out globally. Australia lists chufa as a noxious weed in several territories, parts of Europe restricted, all while these same regions struggle with food security, rising agricultural costs, and environmental degradation from intensive farming. It's like watching someone dying of thirst while standing next to a well. But the well has been declared illegal because the water company can't charge for it. Now, I'm not saying chufa is perfect. It is aggressive. If you plant it in your garden, it will spread. You'll be finding tiger nuts for years. It can be challenging to eradicate if you change your mind. But let's be honest. So are mint, bamboo, and morning glory. And nobody's declaring those criminal threats to agriculture. The difference is, those plants don't threaten anyone's profit margin. And here's the really interesting part. Despite decades of eradication efforts, chufa is still around. It's still growing. In the American South, it persists in fields despite herbicide applications. In Spain, it's a protected agricultural product, with its own denomination of origin. In parts of Africa, it's still cultivated as a food crop. The plant refuses to disappear because it's fundamentally good at existing. This is what resilient food systems look like. Not monocultures of patented seeds dependent on chemical inputs. Not crops that fail without perfect conditions. Real resilience is a plant that grows when others won't. That feeds people when industrial systems break down. That asks for nothing and gives plenty in return. Some gardeners are quietly bringing chufa back. Small-scale growers who recognize its value. Permaculture enthusiasts who appreciate low-maintenance perennials. People interested in food security who want crops that'll survive neglect. You can buy chufa tubers online. Those sellers often market them as wildlife food, which is legal in places where growing them for human consumption might not be. If you do decide to grow chufa, understand what you're getting into. Plant them in spring after the last frost. They prefer loose, sandy soil but will tolerate almost anything. Water them occasionally until they establish. Then they're basically self-sufficient. Harvest in fall by digging up the tubers. You can eat them fresh, dried, or processed into flour or milk. They taste mildly sweet and nutty. Kids actually like them, which is more than you can say for most health foods. But be aware, check your local regulations. Some jurisdictions really do prohibit cultivation, and if you plant them, contain them. Use barriers or grow them in isolated areas, because they will spread. This is a plant that wants to live, and it's very good at it. The bigger question is why we need to have this conversation in whispers. Why a food crop that sustains civilizations is now contraband in supposedly advanced agricultural societies. The answer comes back to the same thing. Control. A system that's built around dependency rather than resilience. Industrial agriculture doesn't want you to know that you could grow significant nutrition in marginal soil with zero inputs. That knowledge is dangerous. It suggests you don't need their products, don't need their expertise, don't need their permission. You could just plant something and let it grow. For an industry built on selling solutions to problems, a plant that solves problems by itself is an existential threat. This is bigger than chufa. It's about how we think about food, agriculture, and self-sufficiency. Lose options. We become more dependent on systems that don't have our best interests at heart. We forget that our ancestors fed themselves with crops that modern agriculture considers worthless. The ancient Egyptians knew something we've forgotten, that the best crops aren't always the most profitable ones. That resilience matters more than uniformity. That a plant that takes care of itself and feeds people reliably is worth more than a high-yield variety that needs constant chemical support. They valued chufa enough to take it into the afterlife. We've valued it so little, we've tried to poison it out of existence. But here's the hopeful part. You can't kill an idea whose time has come, and you can't kill a plant that's this determined to survive. Chufa is still here, still growing, still waiting for us to remember what it is and what it can do. And maybe, just maybe, enough people will start asking why a superfood became a weed, and whether the agricultural system that made that decision actually has our best interests at heart. The Egyptians were right. Chufa is worth preserving, not just in museums or history books, but in gardens and fields and food systems. It's a piece of agricultural wisdom that refuses to die, no matter how hard modern agriculture tries to bury it. Thanks for watching. If this made you think differently about what grows in your backyard or what gets classified as a weed, you're not alone. The plants are still out there, and the knowledge is coming back. Sometimes the best way forward is remembering what worked for thousands of years before we complicated everything.